Hi, thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. In this video we're going to read from Exodus 10 and talk about atheists denying the obvious. There are many people who claim that God does not exist, and they claim that there's no evidence for the existence of God. And as part of that, atheists claim that they're being very rational and intelligent when they deny the existence of God. The truth is, atheists are very irrational. The truth is, atheists are denying the obvious. In this video, we're going to read Exodus 10 and look at an example of Pharaoh denying the obvious. And then we'll look at some verses in Romans that tell us that denying the obvious is something that's very common in humanity. Now, before we get into Exodus 10, let's review the first 9 chapters just to get some context. When we start reading at the beginning of Exodus, it tells us the Israelites moved from Canaan down to the land of Egypt. They were there for several centuries, and after a while the Egyptians turned the Israelites into slaves. Then we're told about a man named Moses. And God, when Moses was an adult, God went to Moses and told him to go talk to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to release the Israelites, and then Moses was supposed to lead the Israelites back to the promised land. So Moses went and talked to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh actually made life worse for the Israelites. And so at that point, God gave Moses the ability to start performing some signs and miracles in order to prove that God was speaking through Moses. And Moses brought a plague of frogs on the Egyptians. He brought a plague of gnats and flies, and he brought pestilence on their livestock. Moses also brought a plague of boils and hail. And through this, a lot of destruction was being brought upon Egypt. And yet through all this, Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh refused to acknowledge God's authority and God's power. And so that's the context that we'll start reading in Exodus 10, starting at verse 1. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may perform these signs of mine among them." So notice that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and the reason he did that is that God wanted to perform these signs in front of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. The next verse tells us why. So that, and again this is God talking to Moses, so that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs among them, so that you may know that I am Yahweh. And so the purpose of all this was so that Moses and the other Israelites would be able to tell their sons and their grandsons about God's power. Verse 3. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may serve me." Now notice the word humble. Ultimately the problem here was that Pharaoh refused to humble himself before God. And again, this is God's message to Pharaoh. "If you refuse to let my people, the Israelites, go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory. The locusts shall cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They will also eat the rest of what has escaped, what is left to you from the hail, and they will eat every tree which sprouts for you out of the field. Then your houses shall be filled, and the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something which neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day that they came upon the earth until this day." And Moses turned and went out from Pharaoh. All right, so notice that Moses left. Moses delivered the message from God, and then Moses walked out. Pharaoh's servants said to Pharaoh, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the Israelites go, that they may serve Yahweh their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is destroyed?" So notice this is Pharaoh's servants talking to Pharaoh. And they talked about Moses being a snare. And the servants said to Pharaoh, "Just let them go." And the interesting thing is the last question here. And this is the question to Pharaoh. Do you not realize that Egypt is destroyed? So these plagues that God and Moses were bringing on the Egyptians was destroying Egypt. It was killing their animals and destroying their crops and trees and plants. And the servants simply asked Pharaoh, "Do you not realize what's happening?" And so obviously the servants understood God's power, but Pharaoh was refusing to acknowledge it. Verse 8, so Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to them, go, serve Yahweh your God. Who are the ones that are going? Now notice the contrast here. On one hand, Pharaoh says, go, but then he follows with a question, well, who's going? It's kind of like Pharaoh's sort of kind of saying, telling them they can go, and yet not really. Verse 9, Moses said, we shall go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we shall go, for we must hold a feast to Yahweh. Then Pharaoh said to Moses and Aaron, thus may Yahweh be with you if ever I let you and your little ones go. Take heed, for evil is in your mind. Not so. Go now, the men among you, and serve Yahweh, for that is what you desire. So Moses and Aaron were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. So again, Pharaoh was willing to let the men go, but Pharaoh wanted to keep the children and the flocks because that would force all the Israelite men to come back. Then Yahweh said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come up on the land of Egypt and eat every plant of the land, even all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and Yahweh directed an east wind on the land all that day and all that night, and when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled in all the territory of Egypt. They were very numerous. There had never been so many locusts, nor would there be so many again. For the locusts covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate every plant of the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Thus nothing green was left on tree or plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh hurriedly called for Moses and Aaron, and he said, I have sinned against Yahweh your God and against you. Okay, so notice Pharaoh acknowledged that he had sinned. And this is Pharaoh talking to Moses and Aaron. Now therefore, please forgive my sin only this once, and make supplication to Yahweh your God that he would only remove this death from me. Now notice the phrase only this once. In previous plagues, Pharaoh had told Moses and Aaron, okay, make the plague go away and then you can go. But then after Moses took the plague away, then Pharaoh reneged on his promise and did not let the Israelites go. So here Pharaoh was saying, well, forgive me just this once. In other words, what Pharaoh was saying, well, this time I'll actually let you go. Verse 18, Moses went out from Pharaoh and made supplication to Yahweh. So Yahweh shifted the wind to a very strong west wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not one locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. But Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh did not let the sons of Israel go. So again, notice God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh did not let the Israelites go. Pharaoh reneged on his agreement again. And that's as far as we're going to read in this video. So again, this is an example of denying the obvious. God and Moses brought all these plagues on Egypt, and they demonstrated God's power, and yet Pharaoh refused to accept the obvious. Pharaoh refused to accept the obvious truth about God's power and authority, and Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. Now let's look at some verses in Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. So notice the word suppress. It says here that people that don't believe in God are suppressing the truth. And it also says the truth about God is evident. It's evident within them, and because God made it evident. Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Notice the pronoun they. They refers to people who don't believe in God. And it says clearly that God's existence is clearly seen through what has been made. And this last line is interesting. Those who don't believe in God don't have an excuse. There's no excuse for not believing in God. Now, let me give an illustration of why this is true. I want you to imagine there's some astronauts and they're out exploring the moon. And they're traveling over the moon, and of course the moon's surface is very lifeless. There's really just nothing there, no trees or plants or anything. There's just this rocks and moon dust. But imagine these astronauts come across a biosphere, and inside the biosphere, or this clear dome, and inside this clear dome, there are humans and there are animals, and the humans have oxygen to breathe, and they have water to drink, and they're able to grow food, and the temperature is correct, and they can live and work in this dome for an extended period of time. Now, if the astronauts actually came across something like that, their natural question would be, who built this? And notice that they would ask who. Astronauts or anyone else who found a biosphere on the moon would assume that a living, intelligent being created it, because only a living, intelligent being can create an atmosphere that has all the elements necessary to support human life. Well, think about the Earth itself. The Earth is simply a huge biosphere. It has the right temperature for humans to live. It has the food chain. We have the oxygen cycle, the water cycle. All the elements that are necessary to live are on Earth. And so if we look at a moon biosphere and assume that a living, intelligent being had to have created it, then so too when we look at the Earth, we have to assume a logical, intelligent conclusion is that a living, intelligent being created the Earth. And that's what's being referred to here in Romans 1:20, where it says that God's existence is clearly seen through what has been made, and they are without excuse. Then verse 25, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Notice the word exchanged. People that don't believe in God have exchanged the truth for a lie. So let's review. We saw that God performed many signs in front of Pharaoh. He brought many plagues on the Egyptians. And yet, through all the plagues, Pharaoh refused to acknowledge the truth about God, and Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites. And likewise, God has made his existence known to every human. His existence is obvious through what has been made. And so, when atheists deny the existence of God, they are refusing to acknowledge the obvious truth about God. And atheists think that they're being very wise and intelligent when they deny the existence of God, but the reality is they are denying the obvious. Thanks for watching BibleMountain.com. Bible Mountain exists to develop biblically literate Christians because the Bible is from God, and each one of us is accountable to God for knowing and following the Bible. It is in our best interest to learn as much about the Bible as we possibly can. If you'd like to increase your biblical literacy, please join my email list so you can receive future videos via email for free. There are links on this video screen to take you to a sign-up page, or you can go to BibleMountain.com and click on follow. This is a free subscription, and your email address will not be sold nor given away. Also, please use the share buttons on your webpage to like this video and share it with your friends. And once again, thank you for watching BibleMountain.com.